It's 2:30, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the July 10th, 2025 Public Utility Advisory Board. We've got kind of a full agenda, so Christine, if you call the roll, please.
Red Chance.
Present.
Greg McGee. Steve McLucky.
Present.
Terry Martell. Michael Talcott.
Here.
Les Boatwright.
Here. Okay, and in your package, you've got the minutes of the May 15th, 2025 meeting or our review, approval, or changes. That was an option for everybody. Page 9, line 13. Paragraph 3, word 2. Okay, any changes needed on the minutes? Christine, will you call roll on those, please? Oh, yeah, anybody want to make a motion?
I move we approve the minutes.
He was moved.
Second.
Red Chance.
Aye.
Greg McGee. Steve McLucky.
Yes.
Michael Talcott.
Yes.
Les Boatwright.
Yes, those have been approved. So now we're down to the action item here, annual officer elections. We elect them the first meeting in July every year. Where chairperson and vice chair are up. Currently, I'm the chair, and Michael Talcott's the vice chair. So I'm willing to stay on if anybody.
I nominate Les Boatwright for chair.
Thank you.
Nomination cease.
Okay. The nomination cease, I guess it's just me. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. I wasn't going to vote no. So. Okay, vice chair.
Nominate Steve.
Okay, we've got Steve. Nominate anybody else? Okay, so Mr. McLucky hat is in for vice chair. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Okay, so welcome aboard, Steve. It's a tough job.
Thank you.
Don't worry about the pay.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're off to the first presentation, or the only presentation on sewer rate study. Lisa?
Right, yep.
Rick?
We have
Rich?
Alex and Dave with Burns and McDonald here to give a presentation today. So without ado, I'll get out of the way and let them do it.
Thanks, Rich. Hey, good afternoon. Like Rich said, my name is Alex Craven. I was a consultant who was primarily responsible for the execution of this study, and I'm supported here today by David Nauman, who is the project director. Like Rich said, we represent 1898 and Company, which is a service mark offering of Burns and McDonald. Walk you briefly through our agenda for this afternoon. So I want to get you grounded in some of the industry trends in the background of what we see happening at the industry level as it relates to water and sewer household costs. And then we'll take a moment and dive through and really unpack our rate study process, the key findings, as well as our summary of results from our analysis. And then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. If you have questions along the way, I'm happy to field those as we go. So to start with, when we do these types of analyses, we think it's really helpful background information and really good context to understand what's happening at the national level as it relates to household water and sewer costs. There's a handful of organizations that track annual surveys, publications, and indices related to what's happening at the household cost level for water and sewer service. And so the top three that you can see here in this table include the Water and Sewer Index, which is tracked by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The National Association of Clean Water Agencies has a cost of clean water index going back reliably to 1986. And then the American Water Works Association has an annual rate survey for sewer costs that goes back to 1996. Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're all familiar with that as an entity, but NACWA and AWWA, those are water and sewer advocacy groups who do a lot of work in and around the water and sewer space. And so when we look at these indices, what it tells us is that going back to 1986, the annual increase in household cost for water and sewer service is roughly 5%. It ranges here between 4.6% and 5.6%. And when we compare that to what we generally think of as household inflation, CPI, of about 2.5% over a similar time frame, we can start to gain some contextual understanding that household costs within the sewer space are increasing at roughly 2 times that of general household inflation. So why is that? What's causing that phenomenon to occur? There's a handful of common factors that contribute to this, and we'll walk through those here just briefly. So the first is a general trend in lower use per account that's putting pressure on variable utility revenue streams. So as those utility streams get pinched, the utility still needs to meet a high level of service as well as invest in future capital, and so they're pushing those they still need to recover those revenues, and so they're going to increase the rates to the customers despite lower usage on a per customer basis. Another is inflation in operating and capital costs. The utilities, especially in recent years, have experienced quite a bit of cost pressure as it relates to personnel, chemicals, commodities, just on the operating side. And then when you look at the capital side, by way of example, ductile iron pipe has really increased in recent years, which is a lot of the underground collection system improvement that's needs to be invested in. More restrictive water quality regulations at the national as well as the state level are putting increasing cost pressures on utilities. One of those examples is bearing out for the City of Independence with nutrient removal, which is a capital investment that the utility is making. We'll see that here in a moment when we take a look at the CIP, I believe in 2028, which is a very expensive project that needs to be done, and that's meeting these regulatory compliance pressures. And then the last one is aging infrastructure. Oftentimes this is buried out of sight, out of mind, but it's infrastructure nonetheless that needs ongoing annual renewal and replacement and investment. Typically, we like to do a snapshot of what is the city's regional standing compared to a handful of peers. And so we'll do a benchmarking exercise to understand, based on the regional peers in this survey, you can see the average wastewater bill for a customer who's using 600 cubic feet, which is a fairly representative usage profile for the customers in your utility. The average in this sample is $57.50, and you can see the City of Independence is right there on average with these peer communities. So let's move into some of the process as well as the findings from our analysis. When we conducted this analysis, we did it largely in a two-step approach. And so where we spent a lot of our time was developing the financial plan that developed the proposed incremental annual revenues that need to be generated to meet the ongoing operating costs as well as reinvest in future capital. The outcome of this is a multi-year pro forma cash flow model that tells us year over year how much revenue the utility needs to generate to meet those costs. That transcribes into the second step, which is the rate design, where we take that bogey, of what's the total revenue that needs to be recovered, and we actually break it down and apply it to the rates that customers pay to help the utility generate the revenue needed to cover ongoing operations as well as reinvest in future capital. And so we'll show you the findings from step 1 as well as step 2 here in subsequent slides. When we set out to develop these financial plans, we have a handful of key guiding principles that we like to follow that we use as a guidepost along the way. One of those is that at all costs, we want to mitigate the felt impact of rate shock through doing really large single increases that then could result in subsequent large decreases. It's more of a steady state annual level to help generate that revenue. So mitigating rate shock through levelized increases was one of the key guiding principles. Achieving the target cash reserve policy was one of the main objectives through the financial plan that we developed. A few years back, PFM supported the city in developing a minimum cash reserve policy, and so we reflected that policy into the development of our pro forma cash flow model and is reflected in this study. Cash funding utility capital improvements. So we developed two options for your consideration, and you'll see here that what was at the forefront of our objectives for the first option was funding 100% of that capital. And then we used scenario analysis to evaluate a number of scenarios as well as sensitivities to meet these key objectives and provide a rate recommendation for your consideration. So moving into some of the key assumptions that were used in the development of that financial plan. So looking at the historical customer data, we can see that the city has had fairly resilient and reliable count of customers as well as use per account at the customer level, which has resulted in fairly stable revenues under existing rates. So going forward in our forecast, we assumed a similar level of resilience in customer accounts as well as usage. On the operating cost side of that equation, we've assumed 5% inflation per year over the 5-year forecast. And then we're reflecting the roughly $25 million in capital investment between 2026 and 2030 as a part of this analysis. So here you can see what are some of the main drivers in that capital plan that I mentioned between collection system projects and improvements, which are largely those out of sight, out of mind, underground assets that need to be continually invested in, as well as I mentioned before, some of the nutrient removal happening in 2028 at the treatment plant that's sitting inside the blue bar there. You can gain an order of magnitude and appreciation for roughly $4 to $6 million in capital investment per year. So what does that mean from a needed system level of revenue increase? So let me take a moment to get you oriented to the bars that you see in front of you in this graph. The stacked bar graph represents the annual cash revenue requirements for the sewer utility year over year. The main drivers of costs for the system include operation and maintenance expense, existing debt service, and then future revenue-funded cash capital. The solid black line that you see running across the page is the utility revenue under the existing rates. And what's been imposed on top of that is, in the dotted line, are the proposed incremental annual revenues that need to be generated to fund this plan in its totality, funding all of the capital, paying for all the operation and maintenance expense, and meeting the cash reserve minimum balance. The second option that we've developed for your consideration leans more heavily, the key objective of this option is to meet the minimum cash reserve policy by the last year of the forecast. And so what we've done is we've programmed in slightly lower proposed incremental cash revenue increases. And so what has to happen here is some of that capital needs to be either cut or deferred to make that series of revenue increases workable. You can see the total amount of capital, we've sized that up by year and in total. So the entire capital plan would need to be deferred or reduced roughly $5 million to meet this level under option 2 of lower revenue increases and still meet the minimum cash reserve policy of the utility. So here we show a comparison of those two options. And keep in mind that the main objectives of these different financial plans were to fund capital as well as to meet that minimum reserve policy. And so you can see in option 1, those incremental revenues from 2026 through 2030, the target cash balance is achieved by 2029, and 25.1 million or 100% of the capital is funded under that option. Alternatively, with option 2, you can see the lower incremental revenues. The target cash balance is achieved by 2030, or the last year of our forecast, and we're funding approximately 80% of the stated capital need from the CIP. If you look at the bars on the right side of the page, that solid red line represents what that minimum cash reserve is in millions of dollars. And then you can see the performance of those two options year over year, where option 1 achieves the balance, the target position by 29, and then option 2 1 year thereafter. Man, excuse my clicker. So when we take those proposed incremental revenues that need to be generated to cover the plan, and we look at how those impact the actual rates themselves, that's what this schedule is showing you. And it's a little bit of an eye chart, but what you see is starting on line 1 through line 8, the utility has an existing monthly service charge that exists on a graduating basis, such that higher meters, larger meters pay a slightly higher fixed monthly fee. On line 9, you see the volume charge, dollars in 100 cubic foot of contributed volume into the system. 10, 11, and 12, you can see the surcharge rates. And then on line 13 is the regulatory compliance fee. We do not propose any increase to that regulatory compliance fee. That fee is remaining unchanged across the forecast at $12 per bill per month. And that's the mechanism by which the utility pays for its existing debt service. So when we take the rates that are developed from option 1 and apply those to customer bills for a 3/4 inch meter at various usage profiles that you can see on lines 1 through 4, 200 cubic foot, 400, 600, 800 cubic foot customer, we calculate what that bill is at that usage profile. And then on lines 5 through 8, you can see what the monthly increase is year to year for this option. So on line 7, you can see for a customer using 600 cubic foot, which is fairly representative of a household consumption profile, that in 2026, that household bill would raise roughly $5.50 over the 2025 bill. And then we move on to option 2, which follows a similar framework. So here you see the actual development of the rates that would be impacting customers. The similar components all apply. The regulatory compliance fee is unchanged. And when we move into the calculation of the typical bill impact, you can see on line 7, for that same customer, 3/4 inch meter, 600 cubic foot, that bill increases $4.11 versus the roughly $5.50 in the example previously. So what does that mean to the benchmarking survey that we conducted and showed at the very beginning? What you can see here is the existing rates and the existing bill right at that regional average. And under option 1 or option 2, you can see that the regional positioning or competitiveness of the utility is largely unchanged. Something that this graph or this visual does not show is that other communities are going to be increasing their rates over time as well. There's a handful of communities on this list who are increasing rates at an annual level. And so in conclusion, to summarize the results of our analysis, revenue increases are necessary for the utility to achieve its target ending cash balance as defined by PFM and adopted by the city. Cash financing is needed revenue increases are needed to fund future capital improvements. So we've developed these options for your consideration. It would be our proposal that for the adoption of option 1, which fully funds the entirety of the capital need over the forecast period and brings the utility into compliance with its minimum reserve policy 1 year sooner than the alternative. And the last point is that option 1 would create more financial resilience and a little bit more financial stability for unknown future cost increases or future capital improvements that are looming beyond the forecast period. Something that we've seen with a handful of our clients is that they will adopt or they maintain an annual CPI-based revenue adjustment. This is purely a policy consideration But what it does is it would allow for, in the event that no rate study was completed, no other rate proposal was being made, revenues would increase annually to help keep pace with rising operating and capital costs. So that's the end of my prepared material. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Anybody have any questions on the presentation? I have a question, I guess, maybe for Lisa and Rich. Are there any new regulations coming down the pipe, part of the pond, that may impact this?
There's the nitrogen and phosphorus removal that we're expecting. It hasn't hit yet. We are fairly confident it will. We just don't know when. So we've kind of been keeping a placeholder in our CIP for that so that we're not caught completely on our heels, but we just don't know when that one's coming. That's the only really big one that I'm aware of.
That may impact
That
some of
may
these
impact,
numbers,
yeah.
It could impact. The downside to that rule is there's so little information about where their minimum allowable levels are going to land. We are doing some pilot testing with the state right now that we hope helps give us a little additional insight into where those limits are going to set and how much it would impact us. But like Rich mentioned, we just continue to set a placeholder of a few million aside for additional units of process that may be required at Rock Creek.
Is it national regulations or state?
National.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Are you looking for a recommendation from us today on any of this to take on, or?
If you are ready to provide a recommendation, we would certainly love one. We will be presenting the same information to the city council at the at next Monday, the 14th study session. So obviously they wouldn't be voting yet. That would just be the presentation. But either this meeting or the August one, if you need time to digest and process what you've just been presented, it's a lot. And just as additional information, bear in mind there have been no rate increases since 2020.
Yeah, I think waiting till the next meeting, we'll put that on the agenda for the next meeting, gives us time to digest it, ask more questions if something pops up. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything further on this topic? Okay. All right, so now we're going down to finance and admin. Questions on utility financial reports? Anything that jumps out?
Hi, Jacob Arnold here, accounting manager over at City Hall. Nothing to really note for this month. I did want to notate the IPL was up for the month as far as revenue. Big driver there was charges for services and penalties, up 5% year to date over last year. Mm-hmm. And then our expenses were down as well, which I always like to see. Then also coming over to the water department here.
Can we, before we leave IPL, I just kind of wanted to say something real quick.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
if you look down at the transfers out to capital projects, right, we were projected to spend $17.7 million, and it's currently at 3.89. So those capital projects are still on the books, and the dollars are still going to be spent. So if you take that into account and say, okay, well, we're going to spend the rest of that 17, it's actually, that difference is sitting right at about 13 million. So when you go down to the bottom line of the excess revenues, that 14 million comes down to less than about $1 million. So we're almost right on budget if you look at those numbers. So then if you carry that on down, then that 82 turns into 68, and we're 16 million above our reserve target right now. So I know it looks really inflated, but that capital spend and personnel, which I'll talk about when I get to IPL specific, those dollars are going to be spent. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. Sorry.
Thank you.
No, you're fine. Thank you for pointing that out. Bringing it over, we're gonna go over to the water department. Water was also up in revenue, just to point out, which is always great to see, as well as expenses down for the month. We are roughly 1.5% up from last year for revenue, but we're also about 13% higher or lower for expenses. So that's always good to see. So we're on track there. And then come over to wastewater and sewer. Relatively flat, where I guess you would say we're at a percent or a point of a percentage down from last year, but relatively flat for the year. And then also expenses are actually down as well, so that kind of counteracted that a little bit. But all in all, nothing major to point out. I did want to bring up, we will have year-end preliminary financials, hopefully by mid-August. We don't know if it'll be by the time of the next QAB meeting, depending on when it falls, but we should have preliminary financials for year-end mid-month next month. So.
Okay, very good. Okay,
Any questions?
any questions on the finances?
Thank you.
Thank you. So we got down to municipal services. Anything to report?
Our big thing to talk about was obviously the cost of service study. That's our primary objective right now, is to just finalize that. I will say, similar on the financial reporting, similar to Joe, capital projects that haven't had any dollars encumbered yet similarly don't reflect in that available cash reserve number. So if you do look at our projects list and the budget and the CIP documents and all those things, there are still those millions that haven't formally been entered into the system or started yet, so the funds haven't been encumbered. So that is another, that's similar, like I said, that looks a little artificially high.
Okay, all right, as noted, thank you. All right, IPL.
So we'll hit AMI project or program management first. So I know this one's kind of taken a while, and we want to take time and make sure we select the right person or group for that. And we have gone through presentations, and we spent the last 2 weeks actually doing reference calls. And some of us, we split out and did different reference calls with different utilities that those program management consultants have worked with, and redid, everybody did their scoring. So at this point in time, it's finance is gathering all that information together, and we'll probably have a meeting within the next week or so to select who we think should move forward. So by the August meeting, we should have our recommendation to be able to move forward with who we think should be the program manager for the AMI project. Moving a little bit slower than we had hoped, but it's okay. I'd rather take time and do it right.
Yeah,
and
for
make
this
sure
kind
we
of
get the right
project,
people.
I think, you know, we've got to do our right by the citizens and make sure we pick the right company, like you said, so.
I had a couple things before we hit the IPL statistical charts, and I'll turn it over to Amy, our finance manager. We're sitting at about 50% staffed on our lineman crews, just so everybody's aware. We've lost some to contractors and some other things. We're talking with some contract crews about augmenting our staff until we can get those numbers back up again. But I still think they do a great job when storms come through, and they're still responding, as always. Just a little more difficult on the project side, so that'll be contracted out a little bit more. And then we have other key positions, you guys know. So I had a retirement of my engineering manager, my T&D manager is retiring. So we've had several key retirements, and we're doing interviews and trying to fill those positions as well. And then we are now all but, I think maybe one or two people evacuated from the third floor of the IUC, and we're all located out at the service center until the new IMC project is completed and we can move into there. Any questions about any of that or anything else until I go to the statistical charts?
Any other questions? No, go for it.
Okay, I'll turn it over.
All right, if you have looked through the May numbers, we are right on track with May of last year in, I think, every category. So just looking at, on the first page there, our total kilowatt hours, right on track with last year and very close to 2023. Then you have the breakdown between your residential, commercial, industrial. On, it's page 47 of your packet. If you look at your total billed revenue, again, right on track with May of last year. This year and last year are both up over May of 23. And then you have your breakdowns there for your individual categories. The last page there showing your cumulative kilowatt hours. Again, we're right on track with where we've been the prior 2 years. And we are slightly up, as has been the trend on our billed revenue for May of this year. I did not see anything that stood out as an anomaly to me, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I also do think that the back page, which is your customer level and your customer count, as you can see, the last 2 years have become pretty steady. So I think that's a good level playing field going forward because we changed some rate structures and things were kind of hard to extrapolate through that time frame, and that's why there's a little bit of a nomenclature there about that. I guess I would ask, are you guys, are these graphs useful? Is there something we're missing? Because we're trying to get back to getting information out there. Is there something else you guys would like to see? We're open to input and want to make sure we're giving.
I think this breaks it down
Giving
really
you guys
well.
what we
It's a nice visual to see, and I don't know of anything that's missing unless somebody else can think of anything. I mean, it gives a pretty complete picture. As we know, we've got the 3 classes, and we'd always like to get the industrial, higher. And for now, it's where it is. Yeah, if we don't, I don't think there's anything else we need on these right now. I think they're
Right.
good.
Once we have the final numbers and everything for end of year, hopefully at your next meeting, if not the following, we should have the 2025 customer counts on there, so we can kind of start to see if that stayed on trend with 23 and 24.
Okay, all right, very good. Anything else on those reports? Okay. The next item is Deputy City Manager.
So you've requested an update on the move to the Municipal Commons facility. As Joe mentioned, IPL has all but vacated this facility. Municipal Services is actively working on it. We have to be clear of this building at the end of this month. And then the contractor will come in and start removing furniture and prepare for demo and remodel, which will begin the second week of August. So this will be under construction. We are still tracking for a fall move-in date at the Commons. The second floor will be ready first, so that'll be community development, engineering from IPL, and all of municipal services. The last floor to be completed over there will be the first, which will include utility billing and health department. And then third and fourth fall somewhere in between. But it's a very, very active construction site where it's in that fun phase where everything changes daily. So the second floor is completely sheetrocked. They should be painting by next week. Sheetrock's going up on 3 and 4 right now. They just started framing the health department this week. So they're pouring piers for the new canopies out front and in the staff entrance side of the building. They were supposed to start that at 1:30 this afternoon. So things are moving right along.
Okay. I think the other thing we wanted to talk about too was the governance
Update.
update. And then you had a question too about stuff that we may talk here or we may move it to the next meeting to do a further discussion on.
Okay. Well, the high level update is, so council has met now both in April and June to go over overall direction and potential charter changes, which was more the focus of the meeting in June. It has been determined that for now, we're proceeding with this new utility board governing IPL only, and then the existing PUAB to then be the recommending policy body for water and wastewater. There is a document that will be presented to council at the study session, also this upcoming Monday, outlining those charter changes, proposed charter changes. So that should already be available online. If it's not, it will be by Friday with that packet, the presentation packet. Feel free to come and join that meeting. I'll actually be giving that presentation, it sounds like, so it should be a good time.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But yeah,
So-
next steps are just determining those charter changes, and then once the council agrees and has consensus on that, then when would they want us to move forward to a vote? And those date options will be discussed on Monday as well.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question, was do they have any idea? Because I've been hearing from some of the council, well, we're a long ways from voting, and others, it's like moving, like a freight train. So somewhere in between there, and I just wasn't sure when it was gonna go to a
So-
vote.
So there would be 5 potential election dates between November of this year and November of '26
Right.
that we could look, target.
Well, with the luck we had with the last charter changes, we want to make sure the language is extremely clear on what's going on.
Yes.
Because those other things have to go back and be revisited at some time too, to get back on the ballot, because they were important.
The draft document is definitely expanded over the existing charter, and there's been a lot of attention to calling out the differences between the Utilities Board and the Public Utility Advisory Board. Of course, some of the main differences there would be the new Utilities Board would have 9 members, and there would be specific requirements associated with serving on that, and that board would have more involvement with just the general setting of the budget, and also would potentially hire and fire the general manager of Power and Light, which obviously is different than as things stand today and would continue to be different than how things are with water and wastewater.
With that board, I'm thinking back to the presentation in this very room for the council. Would that board also be setting rates that the council would have a final vote on and the other things that Springfield does?
Yes, that board would approve the rate structure. It would also, it's set up to approve pay scales and things like that
Yep.
for Power and
Okay.
Light as well.
Given that, my
With a,
question.
with a final approval from council.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, I want to make sure that was still the case. Given that, my question is why would the PUAB not still be involved with IPL? I noticed the Springfield model is that there is a citizen advisory group that advises that board. Columbia has a citizen advisory group that advises their board. San Antonio, I remember our DKMT folks saying that San Antonio has that, the Board of Public Utilities across town here. So I'm just not sure why the PUAB is losing involvement with IPL and just doing the other two. If in fact that board is not, it's not just advisory to the council, you're saying they would hire a director and do those kind of things.
Correct. It is no longer just an advisory board. They would
Yeah.
have much more direct involvement with setting budgets, setting rates, making the high-level personnel decisions. I believe the only 2 positions that that board would be potentially hiring and firing would be the comptroller and the general manager.
Yeah.
But there's bonding associated with that in this new document, and, you know, the proposed charter changes. My general feeling is just to create that very clear separation with complete difference in this change in governance. There was obviously a lot of discussion around whether all the utilities should be governed by this new board or not.
Yeah.
Springfield, Columbia, everybody has a little bit different iteration. In Springfield, it's city utilities, but sanitary isn't part of that. They're part of environmental science or environmental services. So there is, the language exists that if it's optional in the future, that if we decide, if council were to determine down the road that we wanted to put the other 2 utilities under this board, that's allowable.
Mhm.
But it's structured to set up to maintain both the PUAB and the new Public Utility Board.
And that's fine, I just don't see why PUAB wouldn't continue to be involved with IPL as a citizen group, if this other group is more a policy group. And if anyone has any opinion or why this happened, I'd love to hear it. We didn't discuss it here, I know.
I don't really have information as to why. I think, like I said, just it's creating that, this is a governing body that's not just advisory and drawing kind of that line in the sand. I know that certainly public involvement is important to the council.
Right.
And having those forums, I don't think that the intent is for that potential public involvement to go away by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's going to be a lot of learning and seeing how this grows as it's very new, and
Sure.
we do very new really well around here sometimes. So I think it's just going to be a learning experience as we move, and that's why I think we are allowing the potential for the water and wastewater to eventually be under that board as well, but definitely not starting that way and just getting our feet wet with this new structure and seeing how it goes, honestly.
And I guess the only other thing I might add is, so that there's no confusion or gray areas of what board reports up to. Like you guys are supposed, report to the council, right?
Right.
Your findings and recommendations.
Mhm.
And I think that maybe there's a little bit of, kind of to add to what Lisa was saying, a little bit of separation of, okay, it's customer service. Well, they report to IPL, but they also report on, so do I report to the council on this, or so there's a clear cut kind of, I think maybe it's just trying to make a clearer separation of where the duties and responsibilities lie. But I understand your
If
question.
I was
and
in
it's-
charge, I would say this group, with advisory in our name, obviously, would report to and interact with the new board rather than the council, which is how Springfield does it. So it feels like some citizen involvement is being taken away by saying we're just on the other two utilities.
I'm certain that is not the intent, and I can tell you, and you can watch the meetings because they're posted, but the composition of the board and having 9 members and
Yep.
just the size of it and the requirements of how many have to live here, have businesses here, that component was still very much an important factor in that determination.
I think it's great. I love the governing board.
Right. I understand what you're
I
saying.
don't understand why you cut out the citizen component. I just don't, it doesn't make sense to me. So.
Further discussion, I guess, is warranted.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. First one is, the light. We're talking about not only doing the pilot, but we're also talking about providing lighting for the whole city. Okay, now I watched the last governance board and kind of, I understand what you're saying. But the other part of that I think got left out was when I got to looking at this again, it talked about without charge, adequate lighting for all streets, alleys, public ways deemed necessary, and so on. But if you read on further, it also says at the request of the council, furnish electricity, water, and sewer service to all city-owned buildings and grounds as needed on the same conditions. So can you explain that to me?
It's a possibility. I would absolutely not call it a foregone conclusion that that's how it shakes out. And, Joe's looked at options that would decrease pilot in kind with what that, providing that power would cost. Again, none of this is set, and these are all decisions for the council to make, and that is the purpose of Monday's study session.
Right. And the reason I'm bringing that up, because this was handed to us last month to review and look over. And part of my concern is, I know they're the model with Springfield is that they do that. However, their pilot's only
Pilot's
3%.
Yep.
And I checked around and I'm finding like Rolla's only 5%, Hannibal's 5.5%, Columbia's 7.5%. And I don't quite understand even how we got to 9.08, which when I'm checking around is pretty high. So to add that to providing electricity, and I know what you said in the governance meeting about shifting funds from one to the other, something about you use the number of like $1 million. I think it was. So like if it costs $1 million of service, help me out on that.
Well, it was just kind of a, do I pay you to pay me
Right.
type of thing, or do I
Okay.
decrease your bill? Right, I mean, and that's the discussion, and you know, all of these things, I think, are put in for discussion purposes, and I think
Right.
you're gonna have some people agree with it, some people not agree with it, some people think it needs to change,
Right.
maybe pilot. Pilot is based off of the franchise fee that's charged to other utilities within the city, right? So it's not, it wasn't just a number picked out of air, and actually, if you take some of those other communities, just to kind of defend Independence a little bit, if you take those other communities and you add all that stuff up, like Springfield is actually above 8% if you were to add all that stuff back into it. So it's 9% is really not out of line. When you get above about 12% is what I'm told on a national average, that's when that you really need to start studying it. But we have studied pilot like endlessly, even since I've been
Okay.
here multiple times by the city management analyst, and it's not, 9.08 is not really out of line, and it's what we charge other utilities in the
Okay.
city. Those questions of impact I've been asked to evaluate deeper of, okay, well, what does that really mean? If you say provide streetlights, well, what is that gonna, how much is that really gonna impact IPL? And we're putting those numbers together, and hopefully Lisa will have that, because I'm sure that question will come up Monday night, right?
So as a ballpark, do we know kind of what the city spends on their electrical or their water? Do we have a ballpark? Not an exact number, but just like a ballpark.
So streetlight electricity is about 380,000 a year.
Okay.
Maintenance, I think we'd need to add that on. I'm not sure what maintenance is, but we do that at cost. And then all of the buildings together were around 1.2 million, I think is what I sent you, Lisa. So about 1.2 million is all the municipal buildings. And so there's a lot of, I provided some other options that maybe you take some of the buildings out of that for different reasons. And those are all discussion points that I'm sure, like I said, will
Yeah.
come up.
So that, again, my concern is that one spot in there. It's one thing for lights, but to give the city the ability to say, okay, we think we need to have all the electricity provided for all the buildings, all the water and sewer for all the buildings. And I know what you're saying. I understand that, well, you know, it's not likely, but when you give the option, 9 times out of 10, that option kind of comes to fruition. And I'm just trying to look out for the ratepayers with this, because I don't want them to have to bear a tremendous burden for something that, which, by the way, there was a citizen speaker Monday night that brought up the Bonder decision. So is the fact that they're taking out 3.17, does that make the Bondurant thing go away? Because I think the whole thing with the Bondurant was you can't do both money-wise, because now you're taking out the IPL being run as a business. So how does that affect that? Is that what makes the Bondurant thing go away?
That decision never goes away, right? That's a legal finding
Right.
in a case that never will go away unless it was taken back to court and something changed and a different judge found a different thing. Like Joe has mentioned, and we've both said, he's actively pulling costs to talk about what would be potential offsets in pilot to provide those services if that's the direction that council chooses to go. But this is, again, all if at this
Right.
moment. And not only is it if council chooses to enact that language, but this is a document that still is going to a vote of the people, right? So we've recently tried charter changes. One of the big flaws noted after the fact was that maybe that language wasn't clear. So this is almost trying to go the polar opposite end and making sure everything that could possibly be called out is. So again, these are all, like Joe mentioned, very much discussion points and in there to have these talks
Right.
and to allow council to make that decision. But again, looking up, you know, the 1.2 million for building electricity, 380,000 for streetlight electricity, having those totals and being able to say, okay, if we want to do this, does that offset pilot? I think that definitely helps with that business-like manner piece of that legal decision.
Mhm.
I don't think, I would be surprised if it turns into an and.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, even putting the 9.08 pilot percentage in there is a discussion topic that we've already heard some, well, maybe we evaluate how that is worded, or otherwise, let's say the city has an ordinance or passes something that changes the quote-unquote franchise fee or franchise taxes, well, then you have to go to a vote of the people to change what you were imparting on everybody else. So there's even discussions around, well, do we put a hard number in on the pilot, you know, or does do we guide that with something else? So there's lots of discussion points, and your points are well taken. And I think Monday night speaker, I'm sure those points will be brought up again Monday and discussed, right?
And that's why.
And I understand it. But
and
this
again,
isn't,
right.
that document isn't like what's going to vote tomorrow, right? So
Correct.
that, it's a living document that is, each time we've talked about it, it has changed pretty significantly, and even in my eyes, that it's
Right.
continually evolving. And, okay, well, the council and residents, we're hearing that they don't like that part. Well, it may be out the next time the document's revised, who knows?
Right.
But their point's well taken, for sure.
Okay, well, and I appreciate that. I guess I was thinking that this was gonna be more of a bigger kind of a thing for us to give input on this document. I thought that's why we got this last month, and that's why I went through it and was kind of picking and parsing and stuff. So,
Well, not to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
I mean, as a utility advisory board, I would absolutely say that if collectively you guys had thoughts that you wanted to send to council, that to prepare a recommendation from the board, I don't think that in any way can hurt. And that was certainly the reason why that very first special called session was supposed to be a joint PUAB and council session. So you guys were hearing that information and could offer an opinion. So I think it's absolutely appropriate for this board to provide what you see as a recommendation
Okay.
on that document.
well, I actually requested this to be put on specifically in as an item, and it didn't get put on as an item. So that's why I was kind of wondering, I was just kind of caught off. So, anyway, okay, one more. How's the billing going to be separated out then? If their billing is all one thing now, how's that going to separate if we go electric and then?
I don't think we change billing.
It
Oh,
won't change.
okay.
I would not change billing.
Water and sewer will continue to,
Oh, okay, so
pay
the
IPL
bill will
for-
still look like it?
yes.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay,
This should be seamless to the resident. This is really just simply a governance issue, and who weighs in more heavily on budget and who weighs in more heavily on the general manager and those kinds of
Strategic
things.
direction of the
Yeah.
utility and things like that.
okay,
Yeah.
But from a resident or any business customer, they shouldn't see this transition.
okay.
It
Okay,
should be seamless.
okay, so last comment and I'm done. I went to the first governance meeting and then I watched the 2-hour one that was on. And the one comment I have about it that I think is missing out of all those governance meetings, not one time did I hear anybody, I mean, not anybody in particular, but anybody mention anything about, when we do this, we really need to be cognizant of doing this so that we instill trust in the ratepayers. Because, there's still all that stuff out there about the ratepayers unhappy about this, or don't trust this, or don't trust that about the city. And I think that's one key piece that's missing in all this discussion is, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do to instill trust in the ratepayers? and then I'm done. So, unless somebody has an answer.
I, transparency is very important to us, and I think that's a big part of why Joe's asked Amy to create the financial charts that she's had, that why finance comes every month and provides those financial reports to this board. That's why these meetings are streamed and recorded and all those things, so people can have answers. It's obviously just simply not physically possible to provide every single person every bit of information that we don't know that they even need to know or want to know. Anybody that has questions at any time of any of the utilities is always welcome to pose those through this board directly to staff. But personal feeling, I feel very much like we've gone to great lengths to provide transparency in our reporting, and that's imperative to us that
Right.
we are doing everything above board, and we try and convey that at every opportunity. So
And I
would hope that going forward, I mean, I know that part of the governance is that. So there's another group of eyes, another group of people that are looking at decisions made, especially around the city's largest revenue entity, right?
Right.
And it's, again, it's proposed to be a 9-person board, so extra eyes even than this board. So I think that, again, that's one of the things that is important. We probably just it's important to say it though too.
And that's what I was just gonna say. I wasn't dissing on what you're trying to do, but my comment is, it's a simple one little sentence. What can we do? How can we do this to instill trust in the ratepayers? It's not what you're trying to tell us here, what you're doing. We understand that as far as what you're trying to do with that. But the people, I think, need to hear, okay, what can we do to instill trust in the ratepayers? And I think people need to hear that, not we say that here, but I think they need to hear somebody in the city government actually say that and mean it. Actually have the people feel like the city really does care, because a lot of times that just gets thrown off into the ditch and forgotten about, because the ratepayers, the city isn't existent without the ratepayers. I mean, the ratepayers pay the bills. So, thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think the selection process of that board is going to be key to keep the ratepayers, right? That this is an above the board type, that there's honesty and integrity in the selection process, and that we're picking the right people to help us make big decisions of one of the biggest assets of the city, right? I'm sorry.
You're fine.
The last one, because that made me think about this. When city manager said he took everything about the non-political, being non-political on the board, the one part he left out was Springfield only allows a one-person, one-party majority. So he didn't put that in with the new language. And Springfield actually says from their section 16.5, not more than 6 members of the said board shall belong to the same political party, and the administration of such board shall be in all respects entirely nonpartisan. Because the history of the kind of in general, historically, one group of people believes totally in renewable, solar and wind. The other historically is more open to gas, fossil fuel. So you need to have a true mixture of people to really come to a point where it's not just one group of people saying, well, this is the way it's going to be. Maybe it's intermeshing. But if you have too many of one party, I don't care which one it is, but if you have too many of one party, you don't have an independent, you don't have an objective look at things. So, sorry, that's it.
Okay. Les had to leave. He asked me to ask if there were any board member comments. If not, next meeting's August 21st, and without objection, we are adjourned.